A betrayal that changed everything. Izuku X Harem. 2 children were born to the greatest heroes of their era, All Might and Telekinetic Queen. To those who knew them personally, they were Toshinori Yagi and Inko Yagi. When the birth of their twins was announced, it caused a massive stir. Many expected them to be prodigies, inheriting legendary abilities, the perfect fusion of their father's unmatched strength and their mother's telekinesis. The twins were alike, yet so different. Kaido Yagi, the eldest by mere seconds, was a whirlwind of energy from the moment he opened his eyes. Always smiling, always moving, radiating a light that could brighten any room he walked into. Izuku Yagi, on the other hand, was his calm counterpart. He barely cried when he was born, instead observing the world around him with wide, curious eyes. Where Kaido would rush forward without thinking, Izuku would carefully consider each step before taking it. Despite their differences, they were always each other's support. If Kaido got into trouble because of his impulsiveness, Izuku was there to help him. If Izuku hesitated or doubted himself, Kaido would push him forward with his unwavering enthusiasm. They were inseparable, 2 halves of a whole. But, as always, something had to happen to change everything. At the age of 4, the day finally arrived for their quirk evaluation. It was a moment filled with excitement, but also a hint of uncertainty. Despite being the children of Japan's most powerful heroes, neither of them had shown any clear signs of a quirk yet. As they waited in the clinic, Kaido swung his legs impatiently. "I bet my quirk is gonna be awesome. Maybe I'll be able to throw crazy punches like you, Dad." He grinned brightly, looking up at All Might with sparkling eyes. Toshinori let out a light chuckle, though the tension was visible on his face. "No matter what kind of quirk you have, what matters is how you use it, son." Izuku, in contrast, remained quiet, clutching his mother's hand. Inko gently ran her fingers through his hair in a comforting gesture. "Don't worry, Izuku. No matter what, you'll always be special to us." Finally, they were called in for their results. The doctor examined Kaido first, reviewing his X-rays and running a few tests. Then, with a confident smile, he announced, "Your son has an enhancement quirk. It boosts his physical strength, though it's still too early to determine its full potential." Inko let out a sigh of relief, and Toshinori nodded proudly. "That's wonderful." Kaido jumped in excitement. "I knew I'd have an awesome power. I'm gonna be as strong as Dad." Then, the doctor's gaze shifted to Izuku. His expression turned neutral, almost indifferent. He reviewed the results several times before finally speaking. "Your other son has no quirk." A heavy silence filled the room. Inko blinked in disbelief, unable to process what she had just heard. One of her children didn't have a quirk. That couldn't be right. "There must be some mistake, doctor," she murmured. The doctor sighed, adjusting his glasses. "The tests show that his genetic makeup is identical to his brother's, yet for some reason, Izuku does not exhibit any superhuman abilities. There are no signs of a dormant quirk." It was as if the entire room had frozen. Inko placed a hand over her chest, her expression shifting from confusion to distress. But that doesn't make sense. My husband and I are heroes. He's a yagi." The doctor shook his head. "There are rare cases where a child born to parents with quirks turns out to be quirkless. We don't fully understand why it happens, but the possibility exists." Izuku watched in silence, not fully grasping the weight of those words, but feeling the heavy atmosphere pressing down on him. His mother squeezed his hand tightly, but his father. Toshinori said nothing. He didn't make a single gesture. He just stood there, staring at the paper with the test results, his expression unreadable. The ride home was uncomfortable. Kaido kept trying to cheer up his brother, giving him light punches on the shoulder. "It's okay, Izuku. I bet you're special in another way, right, Mom?" Inko forced a smile and nodded. "Of course. It doesn't matter what a piece of paper says. You're still our son." But Toshinori still didn't say a word. He just gazed out the window, a deep frown on his face. Inside his mind, a storm of emotions raged. As the symbol of peace, he had protected thousands. He had inspired generations. And now, his own son had no power at all. He couldn't shake the tight knot in his chest. Had he failed? Was it his fault? What kind of life would Izuku have without a quirk, in a world where heroes shaped destiny? Izuku lowered his gaze. He didn't fully understand what it meant to be quirkless, but he could feel it. He could feel that something in his father had changed in that moment. Something that would never be the same again. From a young age, Izuku had learned to read people's expressions. He didn't always need words to understand what others thought of him. That day, sitting in the doctor's office, he had felt those looks on his small body. Pity. Disbelief. Disapproval. Days passed, but the looks remained, following him even at school. During outings, the murmurs of adults never stopped. It seemed that news of one of Yagi's sons being born without a quirk had spread quickly. As time went on, the situation didn't improve. The stares and whispers were soon replaced by something much crueler, the direct taunts of other children. There goes the quirkless kid. He's probably adopted. Look, that's Kaido's useless brother. Some of the comments were even harsher, but Izuku simply looked away, refusing to let them affect him. From a young age, he had learned that the opinions of those kids didn't matter. Luckily, he wasn't alone. His brother Kaido, always energetic and with a fiery spirit that reminded everyone of their father, defended him without hesitation. With a wide grin and clenched fists, he would stand between Izuku and his bullies. Say that again and I'll make you eat dirt. The other kids immediately backed off. No one wanted to mess with Kaido Yagi, but the one who truly kept the bullies in check was Katsumi Bakugo. Despite her explosive temper and strong personality, she always made sure no one laid a finger on Izuku. With her blonde hair tied in a low ponytail and her sharp crimson eyes blazing with fury, she would plant herself in front of anyone who dared to insult him. "Shut up, you damn extras," she would shout angrily, ready to throw a punch if necessary. It was curious. Katsumi could be rough, arrogant, and impatient, but with Izuku and Kaido, she always showed a different side. She never hesitated to reveal her softer side around them, something Izuku had always found both endearing and fascinating about her. The three of them grew up together, becoming inseparable. However, as the years passed, things didn't completely improve. By the time they entered Aldera Junior High, Izuku had already resigned himself to his nickname. The Quirkless One. That was what everyone whispered behind his back. Even so, he didn't pay much attention to them. Unlike those idiots, he was analytical. He knew that most of his classmates had no future in the world of heroes. Many of them had irrelevant quirks or simply lacked the determination to make it far. But he did know two people who would reach the top, his brother Kaido and his best friend Katsumi. That particular day, Izuku gazed out the classroom window, feeling his heart pounding with nerves. It wasn't just any day. It was Katsumi's birthday. And after so many years of friendship, he had finally decided to gather the courage to confess his feelings. Over time, Katsumi had stopped being just his friend. She had become the one person who always understood and supported him, the woman he wanted to be with. When the school day ended, he waited patiently for his classmates to leave. That was when he noticed Kaido approaching Katsumi and saying something to her. She let out a laugh and playfully punched his shoulder before saying goodbye. Izuku frowned slightly, wondering what they had talked about, but he quickly shook his head. Now wasn't the time to worry about that. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. "Hey, Deku, what's up?" Katsumi asked, flashing that cocky yet friendly smile she always had for him. Izuku felt his throat go dry, but he managed to pull himself together. "It's your birthday, and I know you love the arcade, so I got a bunch of tokens. Want to come with me?" Katsumi looked surprised for a second before her face lit up with excitement. Let's go, let's go. The night is young," she exclaimed, grabbing Izuku's hand and pulling him along with her usual energy. Izuku barely had time to react before he found himself running after her, his heart pounding in his chest. In that moment, he couldn't help but smile. The world might have called him the Quirkless One, but when he was with her, none of that mattered. The afternoon was amazing. Izuku watched Katsumi enjoy every game, and seeing her smile was a delight to his heart. Despite his quiet and reserved nature, when it came to someone important to him, he loved without limits. A small smile formed on his lips as he watched his friend immerse herself in the fun, her eyes shining with excitement as she moved from one game to another. As the sun began to set, they walked through the city, enjoying the cool evening air. Katsumi laughed and spoke enthusiastically about everything they had done. "I can't believe how bad you are at the dance game, Deku. You look like a malfunctioning robot," she teased, laughing as she recalled the stiff moves Izuku had dared to call dancing. Izuku laughed with her and scratched his cheek, a little embarrassed. "Well, you're the queen of the dance floor. No one could beat you at that." The compliment made Katsumi smile proudly. "You're right, but at least you put on a good show." They continued walking until they reached a bridge with a breathtaking view of the sea. The cool breeze moved Katsumi's hair as she stepped closer to the edge, stretching out her hand to feel more of the fresh air. "You really know how to make a girl happy," she said with a smile, turning to look at him. "Whoever wins your heart is going to be really lucky." Izuku clenched his fists tightly. This was it. He had to say it. "Katsumi, there's something I need to confess." She tilted her head slightly, noticing that her friend looked more serious than usual. "What is it, Deku?" He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside his chest. "I like someone." Katsumi's eyes widened in surprise before she flashed a mischievous grin. "Oh wow, really? Come on, tell me who it is. I can't believe my super reserved friend actually fell for a girl." Izuku continued, his voice steady but with a slight tremor. "She's a little taller than me, she likes to wear her hair in a ponytail, she's kind of rough, but she has a kind heart." Katsumi's smile froze for a moment. "No, it couldn't be. I've known her for many years, and she's my only friend." Her heart started to race. A part of her wanted to stop him, but she remained silent. "The person I love is you, Katsumi," Izuku finally said, his expression sincere and vulnerable. "I've loved you for years, but I was afraid of rejection. However, I can't keep hiding what I feel anymore." Katsumi felt a lump in her throat. She had known this could happen at some point, but she never thought Izuku would actually say it. Her gaze dropped, and she pressed her lips together before sighing. Slowly, she took his hand gently, feeling the slight tremble in his fingers. Izuku's heart swelled with hope at the gesture, but she already knew what she had to do. "Izuku, you know I care about you," she began softly. "You're a great guy and all, but..." The moment she said that word, she saw how Izuku's smile began to fade. "But I don't like you that way. I only see you as a friend." The silence that followed was overwhelming. Izuku felt his chest tighten, as if a massive weight had just crashed down on him. His gaze dropped for a moment, and he swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice from breaking. "Oh. I see," he said with a weak smile. But it wasn't real. It wasn't the smile he always wore. Katsumi noticed it immediately, and a lump formed in her throat. Katsumi felt a sharp pain in her chest upon seeing him like that, but she knew that lying would only make things worse. "You're an incredible person, Izuku, and I know someone truly special will come into your life. But that person just isn't me." Izuku felt his heart clench, and even though he had considered the possibility of rejection, it didn't make it hurt any less. He gently let go of her hand, taking a small step back. With his eyes fixed on the ground, he let out a whisper. "Who is it?" She hesitated, trying to find the right words. Not answering would only drag this out longer than necessary. Finally, she took a deep breath and decided to tell him the truth all at once. "Kaido. Your brother. We've been together for a year." Izuku's head snapped up, his eyes filled with nothing but pure disbelief. He remained silent, trying to process what he had just heard. His own brother was with the girl he loved. At that moment, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He placed a hand over his heart and gripped his shirt tightly, as if trying to soothe an ache that threatened to consume him. Katsumi stepped forward, concerned. "Izuku, I..." But before she could finish, he quickly stepped back, as if her touch was poison. He looked at her, and she felt something inside her shatter at the sight of his eyes. There was no anger, no hatred, but there was also no trace of the kindness he had always looked at her with. "Izuku, I..." she tried again, but he simply turned away, giving her his back. She wanted to follow him, but his next words stopped her completely. "It's over, Bakugo-san. From now on, there's nothing left to talk about." A shiver ran down Katsumi's spine when she heard him call her that. Never, in all the years they had known each other, had he ever called her that. She tried to push down the weight in her chest, but frustration bubbled up inside her. Why are you doing this? Did I do something wrong by loving someone else? She asked, her voice tense, trying to conceal the turmoil within her. Izuku stopped for a few seconds and lifted his gaze to the sky. You're wrong, he said in an emotionless tone. I'm not upset because you love someone else. I'm upset with you and Kaido for lying to me all this time. I'm upset because I had false hope. And I'm upset with myself because, despite everything, I still love you. His words stabbed into Katsumi's heart like a knife. She wanted to say something, but the words got caught in her throat. Feeling the weight in her chest, she clenched her fists and lowered her head, unable to meet his gaze. Izuku started walking away without looking back. Katsumi, her eyes brimming with tears, forced herself to call out to him. Izuku, please. Wait. But he didn't stop. His steps carried him forward, ignoring her pleas. He couldn't stay there. He couldn't endure that pain for even a second longer. His chest burned, each heartbeat reminding him of how foolish he had been. He clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. It was humiliating. All this time, all his love, his hopes, his trust. It had all been a lie, one that only he had believed was real. He walked aimlessly, his mind clouded. By the time he finally arrived home, the night had already advanced. He opened the door carefully, trying not to make a sound, but voices coming from the backyard caught his attention. Moving silently, he approached and peeked out cautiously. What he saw made him freeze in place. All Might, his father, stood tall in his hero suit. Beside him, his mother watched with pride, but not at him. At Kaido. Kaido, the perfect son, the pride of the family. And the worst part wasn't even that. It was what was happening right in front of his eyes. One for all. Izuku whispered, feeling his chest tighten. He had heard every word that had been spoken. His father had explained the origin of his power, how it was passed down from generation to generation, and most of all, how he had decided that Kaido was the worthy successor, completely ignoring his other son. A son who also wanted to be a hero, but had been born without a quirk. A son who needed that quirk more than anyone. Izuku watched as his brother took the strand of hair that All Might offered him. A strand of hair that contained what he had wished for his entire life. A quirk. I will make you proud, father. Kaido's voice was filled with confidence. Toshinori smiled and ruffled his son's hair affectionately. You already are my greatest pride. Kaito. Izuku murmured without realizing it. His brother paused for a moment, turning his head slightly, but he didn't hesitate. With determination, he placed the strand of hair into his mouth and swallowed it. The air in Izuku's lungs felt heavy. So, his voice was barely a trembling whisper, I was never even an option for you. Dad? By now, all three of them had noticed his presence, but none of them had considered how he would feel about being completely left out of this. All Might closed his eyes for a moment before turning to face him. Izuku. This isn't personal. Not personal. Izuku's voice broke as he took a step forward. I spent my whole life waiting for you to look at me, to tell me that I could be a hero too. But you never did. It's not that I don't believe in you. All Might tried to say, but Izuku cut him off. Then why was I never good enough for you? Why didn't you give one for all to me? You know why. Because I wasn't born with a damn quirk, he shouted the last part in fury. His mother lowered her gaze, guilt washing over her for having left him out of that decision, for never even considering Izuku as a candidate to inherit one for all. Kaido, on the other hand, looked at him with an expression Izuku couldn't quite interpret. Brother, you don't understand. Kaido began. No, Kaido. I understand perfectly. Izuku clenched his fists, feeling his anger and helplessness mixed together inside him. To all of you. I was never enough. I was always the disgrace of this family. He took a step back, slowly distancing himself. Izuku, please, listen to me. His mother tried to call after him. But to him, they could be dead, and he wouldn't shed a tear. His mother broke into sobs as she saw the look in her baby's eyes, and realized that there was no love left in them. Izuku stepped into the house, feeling his world shatter for the second time that day. His entire life had revolved around the hope of becoming a hero, despite not having a quirk. He had endured insults, mockery, and the contempt of others, but he had always believed that at least his family would support him. That his father would see him. But they hadn't even asked. No one had considered his dreams. And, as always, they had chosen Kaido over him. He walked up to his room in silence. He packed a few essential things and, before leaving, placed a note on his desk. Just a few simple words of farewell, knowing that his parents would barely notice. Before he could leave, as he prepared to sneak out through the window, he heard his mother's voice. "Honey, please, don't be angry." Izuku shut his eyes tightly, holding back tears. "You don't understand, Mom. Izuku, this doesn't mean we don't love you." "Love me?" He let out a bitter laugh. "Since when have you ever loved me?" Inko took a step closer to the door but didn't open it. "You've always been special, but Kaido." "Kaido, Kaido, Kaido." Izuku shouted, his throat burning. "It's always him. Have you ever thought about me, even for a second?" A painful silence followed on the other side of the door. "Izuku, we just want what's best for you." Izuku clenched his teeth. "No, Mom. What you want is what's best for Kaido. I have never been important to you." He stood there, his heart filled with anguish, hoping that his mother would open the door, hold him, and tell him she was wrong. That she would apologize and, somehow, everything would go back to the way it was before. But it didn't happen. Izuku took a deep breath, feeling his chest sink into an endless abyss. He turned toward the window and opened it carefully. The night breeze hit his face, but his heart still burned from the betrayal of those he had loved. "Even you don't believe in your own son." Those were his last thoughts before he left, with no intention of coming back. Once outside, he walked through the dark streets of Japan, feeling the cold night air seep into his bones. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He glanced at the screen with little interest and, without checking the name, answered. "Izuku, please, let's talk." Katsumi's desperate voice reached his ears. Izuku didn't respond. He simply listened. From her room, Katsumi gripped her phone tightly. She was angry, frustrated, and, as always, let her emotions take control without thinking about the consequences of her words. "You know what? I don't even know why the hell I'm worrying about a guy with no future like you. I chose your brother, so what? I don't owe you an explanation. He's better at everything, and most importantly, he has a powerful quirk. Not like you, you worthless quirkless piece of shit." Her breathing was heavy. The moment the words left her mouth, her eyes widened in panic, realizing what she had just said. "Izuku, I didn't mean." A bitter laugh cut off her apology. "Heh, thanks, Bakugo. With that, you've completely killed whatever useless feelings I had for you." His voice sounded hollow, as if a part of him had just died. The phone slipped from his hands, and he stomped on it hard enough to shatter it. Katsumi tried calling him back, but it was too late. Her calls went nowhere. She collapsed onto her bed, covering her eyes with her arm to hide her tears. "It's fine, I can still fix this. I'll just talk to him tomorrow, and everything will be okay." What she didn't know was that she wouldn't see him again for months, and by the time she finally did, it would already be too late to fix her mistake. Time skip. 1 year later. A year had passed since that night, and although the world kept moving forward, the Yagi family couldn't ignore the void Izuku had left behind. His departure had been a devastating blow, one that none of them had expected. For Inko Yagi, the pain was unbearable. Every night, she replayed that last conversation with her son, every word she had said, every gesture she had ignored. Now, with a clearer mind, no longer clouded by the frustration of the moment, she realized just how cruel she had been. If only she had pushed the door open, if only she had hugged him and begged for forgiveness, if only she had been a better mother, he never would have left. But it was already too late. When she finally realized something was wrong and rushed to his room, all she found was a note. A note that shattered something inside her. "I hate you, Yagi family." It was too late to fix her mistake. Izuku, her little boy, had already disappeared without a trace. As high-ranking heroes, neither she nor Toshinori could afford to let their emotions interfere with their work, so they left the search in the hands of the police. However, no effort yielded results. Izuku was never found, and now Inko would have to live with the guilt of not doing more for her son, of not stopping him before he left. The other person who was devastated by his departure was Katsumi Bakugo. Even though she knew it wasn't her fault that she didn't return his feelings, she couldn't help but feel responsible for his disappearance. Izuku had been her friend, even when she was rude and impulsive. Despite her explosive personality, he had always supported her and cared for her unconditionally. She remembered the times when she hurt herself with her quirk or when, as a child, she would run off to cry alone after other kids called her a boy because of her behavior. But Izuku had always been there, ready to comfort her and make her smile. And now, he was gone. Maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong. Those thoughts constantly invaded Katsumi's mind. On the other hand, Kaido had moved on, though deep inside, a part of him ached as well. However, what stood out the most in his mind was the belief that his brother had been a coward. He hadn't fought for his dreams, he had simply run away. If he truly wanted something, he should have worked hard to achieve it, not disappeared like a spoiled child. His father didn't know what to think either. Toshinori had tried to justify his actions, telling himself that he had done what was best for his family. But still, every time he saw Kaido using One for All, he couldn't stop the pang of guilt that struck him. He hadn't considered Izuku as a candidate for the power because his body wasn't suited to withstand it. Kaido, on the other hand, was perfect. His strong physique, his innate talent, his brilliance as a hero in training. He had been the logical choice. But then, why did it feel like he had failed? Both Kaido and Katsumi had been accepted into UA, and in the past few weeks, their lives had turned into chaos. During their training at the USJ, they had been attacked by the League of Villains. Since then, security had been tightened, and now the students were required to live in the school dormitories. As Katsumi carried a sack full of clothes and belongings to her new room, she came across one of her new classmates, Melissa Shield. She had joined a few weeks after them, and from what little Katsumi knew, she was the daughter of an old friend of All Might. However, what stood out to everyone was the coldness with which she treated him. She always avoided him, and when she had to speak to him, her attitude was dry and distant. "Hey, Blondie," Katsumi said with a defiant smirk. Melissa raised an eyebrow. "You do realize you're kind of blonde too, right?" Katsumi scoffed. "We're not here to debate hair colors. I haven't seen you talk to many people. Are you antisocial or just elitist?" Melissa crossed her arms and gave her a once-over. "I simply have no interest in wasting my time with just anyone." "Ha, just anyone, she says," Katsumi mocked. "Well, if that's the case, I won't bother you anymore. I just wanted to see if you were as stuck-up as you seemed. And wow, you really are." Melissa rolled her eyes. "I don't have time for childish games." "Whatever you say, princess," Katsumi shot back sarcastically before walking away. Yet, as she left, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something oddly familiar about Melissa's demeanor. It was as if she had seen that expression before. But where? Melissa reached her room, locked the door behind her, and collapsed onto the bed. She took a deep breath before sitting cross-legged, closing her eyes. Her breathing slowed, and her mind sank into darkness. Suddenly, a three-tomo pupil spun within her, watching her intently. Electric energy crackled around her, wrapping her consciousness in violet flashes. That was when a deep voice echoed in her mind. "How is everything at UA, my dear Shogun Raiden?" The mental landscape shifted. Melissa no longer looked like her usual self. Her sky-blue eyes turned violet, and her hair shimmered with electric streaks. Small bolts of lightning danced around her, though her expression remained calm and calculating. "Everything is going according to plan. The school festival is coming up soon, and I'll prove just how useless this generation of heroes really is," she replied with unwavering confidence. Yet, after a brief silence, her voice softened, tinged with a hint of doubt. "When will I see you again?" The spectral image of the spinning pupil faded, and in its place, a figure materialized. A tall young man with long white hair and violet eyes marked by several concentric circles stood before her. Though his expression was serious, there was something else in his gaze, something Melissa longed for. "Don't be impatient. All in due time." His voice was a whisper, heavy with power. His fingers gently caressed Melissa's cheek, and she closed her eyes, savoring the touch. "I will fulfill your wishes, master," she murmured with devotion. The landscape dissipated in an instant. Melissa's eyes fluttered open, pulling her back to the reality of her room at UA. Her breathing had quickened slightly, but she swiftly regained her composure. She stood up and stretched, only to be pulled from her thoughts by a knock on the door. "Meli-chan, tell me why you've been ignoring me all this time." That voice. Once, it had filled her with joy, but things were no longer the same. Melissa pressed her lips together, forcing down her emotions before turning the doorknob and opening the door. There he was, a man she had once admired, until she learned the truth. The truth about his selfishness. The man who could have given her the chance to become a hero but had instead chosen to pass his power on to someone else. Would she tell him the reason for her resentment? Of course not. He no longer deserved an explanation. There were only two people who still held a place in her heart, her father, who had always given her his love, and the other, the one who had given her power, who had trusted her and allowed her to fulfill her dreams. "Just because you're my father's friend doesn't mean I have to talk to you." Toshinori frowned, confused. He didn't understand why the girl he had watched grow, the one he had once considered like a niece, no longer spoke to him. He could even see it in her eyes, contempt, resentment, but he couldn't grasp the reason behind her hostility. He wanted to say something more, but Melissa struck him with a direct blow to the heart. "Instead of wasting time with me, you should be out looking for your lost son." The impact of those words was clear in All Might's expression. His gaze darkened, and his posture tensed. Melissa didn't wait for a response. She simply shut the door in his face, leaving him standing alone in the hallway. Toshinori let out a weary sigh, running a hand through his hair before turning, only to meet the eyes of his wife. Inko stood there, watching him with a gaze full of sorrow. It had been a year since he had last seen her smile. And that was yet another thing he blamed himself for. "Inko." She stared at him, her expression hollow. The dark circles under her eyes, the pallor of her skin, the way her hands clutched the hem of her blouse, all of it revealed that not a single day had passed in peace since Izuku had left. "I want my baby back, Toshi. I miss him, and I feel like I can't go on like this, knowing that I hurt him and drove him away from me. Tell me, have you found any news of his whereabouts?" Toshinori swallowed hard. He knew the answer she was looking for wasn't one he could give her. And that hurt more than any blow he had ever taken in his life. "No, Inko, there's still no news of him." She nodded in silence, but he noticed how the emptiness in her gaze deepened. Her lips trembled for a moment, but in the end, she said nothing. She simply continued walking down the hallway. Toshinori raised a hand, wanting to stop her, wanting to hold her, to comfort her somehow, but, what could he say? There were no words that could fill that void. As she disappeared into the dimly lit corridor, he felt a crushing weight settle on his chest. Far away, on an isolated island, a towering castle loomed over the landscape. Inside, an obsidian throne stood in the heart of a grand hall, its high, blade-like back casting jagged shadows across the floor. At its base, three figures knelt with their heads lowered, silently awaiting their orders. Mirko, Ryukyu, and Lady Nagant, his elite. His shadows in the world. The man seated on the throne rested his chin against his hand, his cold gaze sweeping over the three women before him. Finally, his voice echoed with commanding authority. "According to Kaina's intel, the villains will attack when the students are at a training camp. There is still time, so for now, remain in the shadows and observe." Without hesitation, the three of them nodded. "Yes, master." Mirko then rose to her feet, crossing her arms with a look of frustration. "I still don't get why we don't just wipe them out. We have the power to do it now." Ryukyu and Nagant exchanged glances. It wasn't that they disagreed with Mirko, but they knew their master's orders were not to be questioned. Even so, he didn't seem irritated by her defiance. Instead, he simply raised his hand, and with a subtle flick of his fingers, Mirko was suddenly pulled toward him by an invisible force. Before she could react, his hand wrapped around her throat. "Because that's what I want, and that's final." Far from being intimidated, Mirko smirked defiantly, her rabbit ears twitching with interest. "Heh, so you like being rough." With a swift motion, she settled herself onto her master's lap, gazing at him with a mischievous glint in her eyes. You're completely insane, and a pervert. I guess that's why I chose you." Without letting her go, he loosened his grip on her neck and pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. His fingers moved in slow, deliberate circles against her back, making Mirko close her eyes, savoring the pleasure of his touch. A few seconds later, Ryukyu smacked her on the head. "Control your instincts, you perverted rabbit." Her voice was calm, but the reprimand was clear. Mirko pushed herself back and, with a swift flip, landed gracefully on her feet. "Oh, come on, dragon girl. Out of all of us, you're the one who wants to take him to bed the most." Ryukyu blushed but didn't respond. Meanwhile, Nagant remained serious, her eyes fixed on her master with absolute devotion. He had saved her life, given her a new purpose, and the power to take revenge on those who had betrayed her. To her, he was everything. The man stood up and walked toward Nagant, his presence commanding, yet when he spoke, his tone was calm. "Stand up." She obeyed without hesitation. Then, she felt the gentle touch of his fingers on her chin, lifting her face so she would look at him directly. "Obedience is good, but I'd like to see you smile more. I find your smile beautiful." Nagant allowed herself a small smile at his words. He leaned in slightly and brushed his lips against hers in a brief kiss. Her heart pounded, but she held herself back. She couldn't afford to show weakness. "Once the mission at the training camp is complete, we'll take a vacation." The three women brightened at the news, though only Kana managed to hide her excitement behind her usual composed expression. As he walked toward his chambers, the three of them began talking amongst themselves. "Finally. We haven't had a break in months." Mirko stretched her arms enthusiastically. "I hope we go to a beach. I want to see our master wearing less clothing." Ryukyu sighed. "You're drooling, Mirko. Get a grip." Nagant, with a faint smile, added, "It doesn't matter where we go. As long as we're with him." The other two nodded. Their loyalty wasn't just about obedience or gratitude. It was because they loved him, so much that they were willing to do anything for him. Mirko stretched again, her smirk playful. "Well, if we're going on vacation, I hope it's somewhere our dear master can truly relax. After all, he must be exhausted from handling everything on his own. Maybe we should help relieve his stress." Ryukyu crossed her arms and rolled her eyes. "You always think about the same thing, you perverted rabbit." Mirko laughed shamelessly. "Oh, come on, tell me you wouldn't love for him to give us a little more of his attention, unless he already has. Or maybe you just prefer to keep things discreet." Nagant remained silent for a moment, but a small smile appeared on her lips. "There's no need to say it out loud. We all know how we feel about him." Mirko leaned closer to Ryukyu, her voice dropping to a teasing whisper. "Look who's talking. The ever-serious and reserved Nagant, yet she has plenty of fun when Izuku is with her. The other night, I heard her moaning so loud I couldn't sleep." The comment made the usually composed hero turn red, but she didn't say a word. Ryukyu sighed, shaking her head. "We should focus on the mission. But, if there's a reward afterward, I suppose I won't complain." The three of them laughed together, knowing that their devotion to Izuku was not just about loyalty but something deeper and more personal. The sports festival arrived. Some students stood out, and All Might was surprised. He knew his niece didn't have a quirk, and when she joined the hero course, he didn't understand why. But her physical performance had left him stunned. She wasn't the best, but she had qualified in every test. However, he knew this was as far as she would go because now came the one-on-one battles, and it was obvious she would lose. Sitting next to his wife in the stands, Toshinori watched the field with a furrowed brow. "Are you worried about Melissa?" Inko asked in a calm voice. Toshinori nodded without taking his eyes off the arena. "You know she doesn't have a quirk. It's a wasted effort for her to be here." Inko immediately tensed. Something in those words hurt her more than she expected. Had her son lived his whole life like this, always treated as someone whose efforts were pointless? The thought made her stomach twist. And then, a realization hit her with force. Had she ever told Izuku that she was proud of him? She searched her memories, recalling moments with her son, conversations, words of encouragement, but she found nothing. The emptiness of that answer made her feel sick. Toshinori noticed her expression. "Honey, are you okay?" Inko took a deep breath, but the bitter feeling did not fade. "Do you really think she is useless just because she doesn't have a quirk?" she asked coldly. Toshinori swallowed hard. He knew he had expressed himself poorly, again. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that." Inko didn't respond immediately. She simply stared at the battlefield with a distant look. The fights continued, but in her mind, there was only one image, her youngest son, looking at her with sadness on the day he left. The silence between them grew heavy, but neither of them found the words to break it. All they could do was continue watching the tournament. Some of the matches were exciting, but none captured the audience's attention more than the fight between Kaido Yagi and Shuka Todoroki. From the very first moment, both fighters displayed impressive skill. Kaido, with his speed and agility, managed to dodge Shuka's ice attacks, his movements calculated as he waited for the perfect moment to counterattack. However, something about the young Todoroki's demeanor slowly drained the excitement from the match. Even though she had the advantage, it was clear she was holding back. She only used her ice, refusing to unleash the flames from her other quirk. Kaido noticed this, and his expression darkened as he gritted his teeth. "You're not fighting seriously," he shouted while dodging another blast of ice. "If you think you can beat me with half your power, you're wrong." Shuka averted her gaze, feeling the weight of the stairs around her. The crowd murmured, questioning why she wasn't using her fire. The pressure was overwhelming. In the end, Kaido managed to find an opening and, with a swift movement, took her down. The whistle blew, and victory was his. Shuka remained on the ground, breathing heavily, her gaze lost. She had failed. Again. When she stood up, staggering from exhaustion, she made her way to the infirmary. Her body ached, but the weight of her wounded pride was heavier. Before she could reach her destination, she found herself face to face with the imposing figure of her father. Endeavor looked at her as he always did, with a furrowed brow and that look of disdain he reserved just for her. "Why didn't you use my quirk?" His voice was sharp. Shuka clenched her fists and looked away. "I don't want to use your fire." Endeavor growled in frustration, stepping forward. "You're useless," he spat with contempt. "Your weakness is pathetic. You have a power that could have secured your victory, yet you choose to be a disgrace." Shuka felt something inside her snap. For years, she had endured his words, his scorn, his insistence that she had to be better, that she had to use her fire. But this time, she couldn't hold back anymore. "I will never use your damn fire," she screamed with all her strength, her voice breaking with rage. "I would rather lose 1,000 times than become like you." A heavy silence fell between them. Then, without warning, the blow came. The slap was so hard that Shuka was sent flying against the wall, hitting it before collapsing onto the floor. A searing pain spread across her cheek, and the metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. For a brief second, Endeavor's expression showed guilt, but his pride kept him from apologizing. He simply looked at her coldly, remembering how disgracefully she had lost, and his anger flared once more. "You are a disappointment." His voice echoed through the space, rough and devoid of warmth. Shuka, still on the ground, gritted her teeth, but she couldn't stop the shiver that ran down her spine. "You reject your own power, what makes you strong, all because of a childish whim. You prefer to lose. Go ahead. That's the only thing you're good at." Shuka felt a knot in her throat. "You are not worthy of carrying my last name," he continued, his eyes burning with the flames she so deeply despised. "You are nothing but a mistake." Shuka opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Her father was no longer looking at her. He didn't even seem to see her anymore. Endeavor turned around, walking toward the exit at an unhurried pace, as if the blow he had delivered meant nothing. "Do not expect me to acknowledge you as my daughter. Because to me, you never were." With those words, he left her there, on the floor, feeling her world shatter into 1,000 pieces. Shuka, with tears streaming down her face, pushed herself up and ran to the infirmary. As soon as she stepped inside and collapsed onto the bed, her self-control crumbled completely. A choked sob escaped her throat, and within seconds, the room was filled with her desperate cries. "I hate my life. I hate my father. I hate my mother for leaving me with that monster," she cried out in rage, slamming her fist against the bed. "I hate this scar. I hate everything." Her breathing was ragged, her body trembling from the anger and pain she had been holding inside. She wrapped her arms around herself, curling into a fetal position as loneliness consumed her. Then, a memory surfaced, one from when she was just a child, sitting beside her mother. It was a time of happiness, a time that had been lost because of her father. "Mom," she murmured, her voice broken. "I miss you." The image of her mother in the psychiatric hospital flashed through her mind like lightning. The last time she had seen her, she had been sitting in that cold, white room, her gaze empty and distant. Shuka had called out to her, had tried to reach her. But there was no response. She shut her eyes tightly, trying to suppress her sobs, but it was useless. Her body trembled, the pain on her cheek burned, but the worst of all was the emptiness in her heart. Rage, helplessness, and exhaustion consumed her until she had nothing left. She drifted into a restless sleep, but it brought no relief. It was pure torment. The nightmare pulled her into a place she knew all too well. "Stronger, Shuka." Her father's voice thundered through the air as she struggled to stay on her feet. She was in the training yard, drenched in sweat and covered in bruises. Her hands trembled, her breathing was shallow, but endeavor had no mercy. "You are a disappointment. Without your other side, you are nothing." Ice spread from her feet, freezing the ground beneath her as she gasped for breath. "I won't use it," she murmured, but the blow came before she could react. Her father struck her down without hesitation. "Pathetic. You're not worth it." She wanted to scream at him, but no sound came out. She wanted to run, but her legs refused to move. She wanted to cry, but her tears had dried up long ago. And then, a different voice shattered the darkness. "Do you want to change? Do you want everything to get better?" The echo of those words wrapped around her. It wasn't her father's voice. It was something else. Something greater, deeper. Something that made her despair feel insignificant. With all the hatred she had buried in her heart, she screamed, "I want everything to change." A soft laugh echoed in the void. "Swear loyalty to me. Swear devotion. Your body and soul will be mine. If you accept, I will change everything for the better." She did not hesitate. "I accept." And the nightmare faded away. She opened her eyes with a gasp. Her breathing was rapid, but she no longer felt fear. She was not alone. A comforting warmth surrounded her, and she realized that her head was resting on something firm, a lap. Lifting her gaze, she found herself staring at a young man who was gently caressing her face. His expression was serene, his features sculpted by absolute calm, as if everything around him moved according to his will. His long white hair cascaded over his back, and his eyes were unlike any she had ever seen. His irises were purple, marked with concentric circles. Shuka felt small before him. It was in that moment that she became acutely aware of his touch, of the way he traced her face with reverence, as if he were holding something precious. She averted her gaze, suddenly insecure, and murmured bitterly, "It looks ugly, doesn't it?" There was no need to explain what she meant. Her scar, that wretched mark that defined her face. Yet, she did not pull away from him. She did not want to. For the first time in a long while, being close to someone brought her comfort. And yet, the fear of rejection coiled in her chest. Would he see her as ugly because of the scar? Would he yell at her like her father always did? The young man's voice resonated with unshakable calm. "You are beautiful, regardless of the scar. But I will keep my word. You are now my woman, and as my first act, I will make everything in your life better." She wanted to believe him, but her life was so broken that it seemed impossible. However, he saw the doubt reflected in her eyes. "As my first gesture to earn your loyalty, I have healed the wound on your face." Those simple words made her look at him in shock. With trembling hands, she reached up to touch her face. The young man, still caressing her, gently took her hand and guided it to her injured cheek. But when her skin made contact, she did not feel what she had always felt. There was no sensation of tight, deformed skin, no roughness of burned flesh that she had traced with resignation so many times before. She did not feel the constant sting or the tension that reminded her daily of her imperfection. Instead, there was only softness, smooth and even skin, as if the scar had never existed. A choked sob escaped her, unable to process what she was feeling. Her fingers trembled as they traced the unblemished skin in disbelief. "This is a dream, isn't it?" she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. The young man smiled at her, surrounded by that unshakable tranquility. "As long as you are my woman, I will make all your dreams come true." Still with tears streaming down her face, she stood up unsteadily and stumbled toward the mirror on the wall. Her reflection stole the air from her lungs. Her hands flew to her mouth, muffling a gasp of shock and overwhelming emotion. "It's gone, it's really gone," she murmured, her voice breaking. A broken laugh escaped her lips. She felt happy, but she was so overwhelmed by the emotion that her smile was unstable, almost fearful. She touched her cheek over and over, as if the scar would reappear at any moment. She turned around quickly and retraced her steps, falling onto the cot and resting her head in the stranger's lap. No, he was no longer a stranger. He was her savior, her hero, her master. And the man to whom she would now give herself, body and soul. She cried, not out of sadness, but out of relief. Because, for the first time in her life, she felt like someone had chosen her. Someone had saved her. Timidly, she looked up at the man. "Can I know your name?" He smiled at her calmly, his purple eyes reflecting absolute tranquility. "Now you are my woman, of course, you can know my name." That comment about belonging to someone, about being someone's, someone who could help her, made her feel happy. "Izuku A, that's my name." Shuka adjusted herself to lie on her back and gaze at the man to whom she now belonged. He was handsome, strong, and most of all, he cared about her. With some timidity, she asked, "Can you save my mother?" Izuku saw the hope in her eyes. He knew she had suffered far too much, that up until now, she had lived in despair. But now she believed in him. And he would never disappoint her. "Of course, I will help her. If that's what you want, I'll do it. But don't forget, from today, you are only mine and no one else's." She lifted both of her hands and cupped his cheeks, feeling his warmth. "From today, I will be Shuka A, and I will be yours and only yours." Izuku was pleased. Just then, the door opened, and Melissa entered gracefully. "I could feel your presence, master." Her voice was soft, yet filled with devotion as she bowed. Shuka furrowed her brow, clearly confused. Izuku, unhurried, gestured for Melissa. "Explain it to her." Melissa smiled faintly and nodded. "A long time ago, I was also lost. Resigned to my life, while I was standing on the edge of a building." Shuka looked at her with concern, noticing the nostalgic tone in her voice. Melissa let out a light laugh. Don't worry, it wasn't anything serious. I was just there, on the edge of a building, watching the sunset." Her voice sounded carefree, but her gaze reflected the nostalgia of a painful past. Shuka watched her in silence, waiting for her to continue. Melissa looked up with a wistful smile. "I always wanted to be a hero. But there came a point when I had to accept that it was impossible." Her lips curled into a slight frown of sadness. "That's when I decided to leave my dreams behind and focus on helping others through my creations." The scene shifted, showing Melissa standing on that building, her gaze reflecting the sadness of accepting that not all dreams come true. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind caress her face. And then, she heard it. "I think you can do more than that." Melissa opened her eyes suddenly and turned. There he was, a young man with long white hair, his purple eyes marked by concentric circles. His white robe was adorned with black tomo patterns, and 2 horns protruded from his forehead. That encounter would change everything. Because he trusted her. He granted her the absolute power of lightning. Melissa returned to the present and opened her eyes. That was the day everything changed. Shuka felt a slight tremor in her hands. She could imagine it clearly. It was him, her savior, her master. Just as he had saved her too. Melissa continued recounting her encounter. That young man, he was strange, but at the same time, he wasn't. In a world where powers are the norm, I've seen much more peculiar human traits. Her gaze landed on Izuku with devotion. But what really surprised me wasn't his appearance, but his words. Izuku watched her with interest. And what were my words? Melissa smiled sweetly and closed her eyes for a moment, as if recalling a sacred moment. The same words that have now changed Shuka's life. You made my life better. And you turned my dreams into reality. Izuku tilted his head slightly, his purple eyes reflecting a hint of satisfaction. I'm glad to know I've kept my promise with you, Melissa. Shuka watched the interaction between the two with a mixture of fascination and a touch of jealousy. There was something in the way Melissa spoke of Izuku, in the devotion in her gaze, that made her realize she wasn't the only one in his life. And yet, seeing the calmness on the other girl's face, she understood something important: sharing him was better than not having him at all. Melissa continued telling more. She recounted how she had met Izuku, how her life had changed since then, how she stopped feeling like just a creator to become someone with a greater purpose. Shuka listened in silence, feeling she had made the right decision in giving herself to that man. Her man. When Melissa was about to say goodbye, Izuku noticed the slight anxiety in her eyes. Before she could say anything, he moved away from Shuka and approached her, gently taking her face in his hands. Without a word, he leaned in and placed a delicate kiss on her lips. Melissa stood still for a moment before melting into the warmth of the sensation. Her face turned crimson when Izuku slowly pulled away. Before leaving through the door, he gave her a confident smile. I will crush all my rivals. Izuku smiled faintly in response. Melissa, still with a slight blush on her cheeks, turned and left the room. For a moment, silence settled. Shuka watched Izuku, but her gaze wasn't on his eyes, it was on his lips. She had never kissed a man before. She had never felt free enough to even consider a romantic relationship with anyone. Her father had never allowed her to have friends, let alone any kind of romance. But now she had Izuku. And she wanted all of him. Izuku noticed the intensity in her eyes and gave a light smile. What's on your mind, Shuka? She felt a slight heat rise to her cheeks, but she didn't look away. She bit her lower lip, a little shy, before speaking. I've never kissed anyone before. Izuku's eyes sparkled with interest. He moved closer slowly, his voice deep but gentle. Do you want to try it? Shuka's heart raced, but she didn't pull back. Her lips parted slightly as she nodded. Yes, I want to try. Izuku smiled with satisfaction, and with the same patience and tenderness he had shown when he had caressed her before, he placed a hand on her cheek and leaned in until their lips brushed together. A light touch at first, almost as if giving her the chance to pull away. But Shuka didn't. Instead, she closed her eyes and clung to his tunic, responding to the kiss with awkwardness, but with genuine intensity. The warmth of Izuku surrounded her, making her forget everything else. And in that moment, she knew she would never be alone again. The atmosphere in the stadium became electric as one of the most anticipated matches began, Katsumi Bakugo vs Melissa Shield. Up until that point, Melissa hadn't shown anything particularly impressive in combat, which raised many doubts about whether she could take on the prodigious and explosive Katsumi. The sun shone high in the sky, reflecting off the sand of the Colosseum. Katsumi, with an expression of pure confidence, cracked her knuckles while small sparks of explosions danced around her palms. Melissa, on the other hand, stood in a calm stance, her blue eyes precisely analyzing every movement of her opponent. Blondie, you'd better surrender, Katsumi said, generating more intense sparks in her hands. Melissa, with a serene expression and no hint of fear, replied. Sorry, but surrendering is not an option. The referee shouted, signaling the start of the match. Katsumi lunged forward, her explosions propelling her with astonishing speed. Melissa barely had time to react, rolling to the side and narrowly dodging the first hit. Katsumi smiled, confident she would win this battle. You're faster than you look, Shield, she said mockingly, launching a burst of explosions in her direction. Melissa dodged gracefully, her movements precise, measured to the millimeter. However, she didn't counterattack. She just dodged. Katsumi frowned. Are you going to keep running, or are you actually going to fight? Melissa didn't respond. Instead, her eyes glowed with determination as she slid her hands down the metallic gloves covering her arms. Katsumi noticed the gesture and decided to end it all in one move. Time to blast you out of the arena, she yelled, leaping high and extending both hands toward Melissa. Melissa dodged once again, but Katsumi was ready. She took advantage of the moment to redirect her momentum and appeared right in front of her, both hands extended. I won, loser. A massive explosion engulfed the area, shaking the ground and sending a wave of smoke and dust throughout the stadium. The shockwave made the bleachers vibrate and the audience held its breath, waiting to see the outcome. An absolute silence took over the place, broken only by the sound of debris falling to the ground. All Might sighed, crossing his arms. It happened just like it was supposed to, he murmured with resignation. He glanced to his side, where Inko was still watching the scene with a different expression. There was no fear on her face, but something much stranger, excitement. "Here it comes," she whispered, her eyes sparkling. Inko smiled with excitement, surrounded by a glowing green aura. Her eyes shone with the same hue, a clear sign that she was using her telekinesis. She could feel it in every fiber of her being. Melissa was much more than she appeared. All Might watched her in surprise. It had been a year since he had last seen her smile like that. He was about to say something, but a shift in the atmosphere left him speechless. The sky, which had been clear until then, darkened with purple hues. Powerful purple lightning began to dance in the air, crackling with overwhelming intensity. Through the smoke, Katsumi was sent flying, stabilizing herself in mid-air with an explosion to prevent herself from falling. She gritted her teeth, feeling a chill run down her spine. What the hell happened, she thought in frustration. She was sure her attack had hit its target, but Melissa. She was unharmed. Then, a voice full of authority resonated in the air, sending chills down everyone's spine. "Eternity will never be defeated." A clean cut split the smoke in two, creating a gust of wind so strong that it immediately cleared the battlefield. And there, in the middle of the stage, Melissa's shield emerged with a completely different presence. With unwavering calm, she slowly pulled a katana from her chest. The purple blade shimmered with electric sparks crackling around it, and the most shocking thing was that the weapon seemed to materialize from her very being, as if her body generated it. The entire stadium erupted in murmurs of disbelief. In the stands, All Might was left speechless. This makes no sense. Melissa didn't have a quirk. "Is AFO behind this?" he muttered, frowning. Beside him, Inko let out a dry laugh and looked at him coldly. "So just because she has a quirk now, you suspect she teamed up with All for One? You're incredible." Without waiting for a response, she stood up and walked away, looking for a better spot to watch the fight. On the arena floor, Katsumi looked at Melissa with a mix of awe and defiance. The blonde dropped her glasses to the ground, closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, her gaze was no longer the same. Instead of the light blue everyone knew, her eyes now glowed with a deep purple, an abyss of pure electricity. Her hair, once golden, began to turn a deep violet as purple lightning danced around her. Katsumi clicked her tongue, trying to hide her nervousness with arrogance. Well. So the blonde really had a quirk. But don't think just because of that you'll beat me. Sparks began to accumulate in her palms, ready to detonate. Melissa raised her katana with absolute serenity. Her stance was firm, imposing. There was no trace of doubt in her expression. "Let's see what you can do," she said softly but full of challenge. Katsumi didn't wait any longer and charged forward with a fierce explosion. Her speed was demonic, moving in zigzags to prevent Melissa from predicting her trajectory. When she closed in range, she unleashed a powerful detonation, aiming straight at her opponent's torso. But the katana moved with millimetric precision. The purple blade sliced through the air with a flash, deflecting the explosion with impossible elegance. Katsumi barely had time to react before feeling a cut on her right arm. It wasn't deep, but it burned. What the hell? Melissa didn't move from her spot. Her sword still crackled with purple lightning, and her expression remained the same, serene, unshakable. "You're fast. But not faster than eternity." Katsumi growled and redoubled her offensive. She launched several consecutive explosions, trying to corner Melissa with a barrage of fire and pressure. But each attack was blocked, deflected, or dodged with unsettling ease. And the worst part? Every time the sword moved, a new cut appeared on her skin. Her breathing became heavy. Her body was starting to fill with wounds. And Melissa didn't even seem to be trying. Rage began to consume her. "Don't underestimate me," she roared, concentrating all her energy into her palms. "This is my full power." With a fierce battle cry, Katsumi extended both hands and unleashed a massive explosion that enveloped the field in a sea of fire and debris. But when the smoke cleared, Melissa was still standing. Her katana crackled with pure electricity, and a faint smile appeared on her face. "I won, loser." Katsumi fell flat on her back with a sharp thud against the arena floor. Her blouse was torn, revealing a deep cut that ran diagonally across her torso. She breathed heavily, her body trembling, not just from the pain, but from the humiliation of being utterly outmatched. The spectators were silent for a moment, stunned by the display of power. But soon, the stadium erupted in cheers and applause. The top heroes watching the fight exchanged tense glances. The way Melissa had fought, the coldness with which she handled every one of Katsumi's attacks. That was not normal for a student. Some swallowed hard, they knew they were witnessing the rise of someone who could change the history of heroes. The next and final match was about to begin. Melissa vs Kaido Yagi. Melissa closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and focused on her goal. She didn't just want to win. No, that wasn't enough. She had a clear objective: to humiliate that useless existence. Kaido would pay for every pain, every injury her beloved had suffered. And she would return it to him 1,000 times over. Today, she would show that the one for all they all revered was nothing compared to her power. Kaido stared at her intently, his eyes reflecting determination. His body was ready, his muscles tense, and the energy vibrating within him. He knew Melissa was strong, but so was he. And he had the advantage of two quirks. "Don't think you'll defeat me so easily, shield." He flexed his fingers, and his aura grew in intensity. Melissa simply smiled calmly and unsheathed her purple katana, the electricity crackling fiercely along the blade. "You have no idea what hell awaits you, Yagi." The battle began with both charging at each other. Kaido took advantage of his enhanced physique from his quirk to close the distance quickly, throwing a punch covered by the one for all. Melissa spun with elegance, dodging it by milliseconds, and slid her sword with a calculated move, leaving a clean cut along his side. Kaido growled but didn't stop. Every punch he threw created shockwaves that shook the arena. "Stop dodging and fight me head-on, coward," he roared, charging with a barrage of highly destructive punches. Melissa watched him with a mix of amusement and disdain, blocking and deflecting each punch with millimetric precision. "Is this all the proud heir of All Might can do? How pathetic." The taunt ignited Kaido's fury. His aura grew as he raised the percentage of the one for all. First, 30%. Then 40%. His muscles tensed, the pressure on his body increased, but he still couldn't reach her. Every time he thought he had an opening, Melissa disappeared from his range, moving with grace that seemed unattainable. "Shut up!" Kaido screamed, charging his fist with 50% of the one for all and launching himself toward her with all his strength. Melissa tilted her head, dodging effortlessly. Then, with a sharp strike of her katana, she sliced the air in front of him, and a purple lightning bolt exploded against his chest, throwing him through the air. Kaido crashed violently to the ground, leaving a crack in the sand. He coughed up blood and forced himself to rise, his legs trembling. His arms were already showing signs of strain from the pressure of his own quirk. "Is that all? Come on, Yagi. Show me you're worth something." Desperate, he raised his power to 80%. His fists were covered in golden sparks as he propelled himself toward her with a blow that could split the ground in two. But Melissa stopped him with a single movement. Her katana intercepted the path of his punch, and in an instant, electricity ran along the blade in a perfect arc. Before Kaido could react, an X was drawn across his face with two deep cuts. "Aergurk," he screamed in pain, staggering backward. His body was at its limit. His arms trembled uncontrollably, bruised from the pressure of the one for all. He fell to his knees, panting. Melissa walked slowly toward him, her katana at her side, flashing with purple electricity. Her eyes looked at him with absolute disdain. "Tell me, Kaido, was it worth everything you did? Everything you stole?" He lifted his head, his face covered in blood, his breath erratic. "Shut up, you don't know anything." Melissa let out a mocking laugh. "Why? Does it hurt? Do you feel helpless?" Well, that's how Izuku felt when they took his place from him. At this point, Kaido didn't even hear what Melissa had said. He didn't notice the mention of his lost brother. He could only feel his own fury burning inside of him. He gritted his teeth in frustration and tried to get up, stumbling. Melissa clicked her tongue with disdain and raised her katana. No, no. You don't deserve to stand before me. In the blink of an eye, a lightning bolt descended from the sky with brutal force, striking Kaido directly. Aerk. His agonizing scream echoed through the sand as his body convulsed from the shock. He fell again, this time with no strength left to move. No. I won't surrender, he gasped weakly, his voice barely a muffled whisper. I will be number one. I was supposed to be the strongest. Not you. Melissa leaned over him, her eyes cold and cruel, reflecting utter contempt. I know your secret, Kaido. I know you have the one for all. But let me tell you something. Her voice dropped to a chilling, deadly tone. It's nothing compared to true power. Her gaze darkened as she brought the tip of her katana down to the ground. A final spark ran through the steel. Stay on the ground, Kaido. It's the only place you belong. Kaido's body was on its last legs. His bruised arms trembled uncontrollably, paralyzed by the pressure of the one for all and the punishment he had taken. He tried to move, tried to even kneel, but his body betrayed him. He fell heavily to the ground, gasping. He couldn't continue. His body begged him to give up. Melissa looked at him with absolute disdain. You're not even a shadow of Izuku. Kaido, with his bloodied face, looked at her in surprise. His mind registered that name. It was his brother. Izuku, he murmured weakly. His heart raced. It had been a year since his brother disappeared. They had searched, but never found any trace of him. And now, Melissa was saying his name with such familiarity. You know my brother. Do you know where he is? He asked urgently, ignoring the pain in his body. In the stands, Katsumi, with Kyoka's help, heard what he said. No, it can't be, she whispered as she put both hands to her mouth. Her heart was pounding. A year without seeing her friend. A year without being able to apologize. And now, someone was mentioning his name. Kyoka, tell me exactly what they're saying, word for word, she demanded, her eyes burning with anxiety. Kyoka swallowed and nodded, using her quirk to better catch the voices from the arena. Kaido asked if she knows where someone named Izuku is. He sounds desperate. And Melissa. Melissa called him her master. Katsumi's eyes widened. Master. What the hell is going on? But what happened next made everyone fall silent. Melissa looked at him coldly. And who are you to speak so familiarly about my master? Kaido opened his mouth to respond, but he didn't have time. Melissa lifted her leg and with a brutal motion, kicked him directly in the chest. Kaido flew like a projectile, smashing the pavement of the arena and crashing into the stadium wall with a deafening bang. Silence took over the place for a moment, before the giant screen in the stadium announced the final result. Winner, Melissa Shield, yelled President Mike. The sports festival had come to an end, and the world had witnessed the birth of a heroine with unstoppable strength. On her way out, Melissa was back to her usual appearance. She was wearing her glasses again, her eyes were blue, and her hair, though still purple, no longer radiated that overwhelming energy. She wanted to leave UA and get some time to clear her head, but on her way, she encountered the family of her master, a family that had abandoned him just for not having a quirk. The desperate voice of a mother broke the silence. Tell me where my son is, Inko pleaded with tears in her eyes. Katsumi was there too, arms crossed and a tense expression on her face. Tell me where Deku is right now, demanded Katsumi, not realizing she was wearing down Melissa's patience. In the blink of an eye, an electric breeze filled the air, and before Katsumi could react, she felt an intense chill on her neck. Melissa was behind her, her katana dangerously close to her skin. The people around them were frozen. No one had seen her move. Don't you dare speak his name so confidently. You're nobody to call him that, Melissa whispered with a terrifying calmness. All Might, who had been watching in silence, stepped forward. His eyes were clouded with confusion and desperation. He couldn't allow this to spiral out of control. Melissa, I know you're strong, but this has gone too far. If you know where Izuku is, you need to tell us. We just want to. But Melissa interrupted him with a sharp look. You don't have the right to speak of him, she spat with contempt. The tension in the air grew even thicker. All Might gritted his teeth, knowing he couldn't just stand by. He took a deep breath and prepared to move. In an instant, Melissa reacted. With nearly imperceptible speed, she struck All Might's wound with the blunt side of her katana. The impact made the hero spit blood. Before he could react, Melissa spun around and delivered a brutal elbow to his face, making him stagger. She didn't give him time to recover. Grabbing his hair, she slammed his head violently into the concrete ground, cracking it with the force of the impact. The silence was absolute. Melissa stood tall, observing everyone present with a chilling gaze. If you want to fight, we can. But it will be at your own risk. No one moved. No one even dared to breathe too loudly. Melissa sheathed her katana with a smooth motion and slowly walked away from UA. Her mission at that place was over. And soon, very soon, the world would change. Only she, the other girls, and her master would rule everything. Camp. After the event, it was announced that the students would have a training camp to improve their use of their quirks. The news excited most, except for Melissa, who remained seated with her eyes closed, completely unaware of her surroundings. Before, she wasn't talked to much because of her reserved attitude. Now, no one even dared to approach her. Her power had surprised everyone, and although no one said it aloud, they all feared her. The bus was filled with conversations and laughter as they headed toward their destination. Amidst the general chatter, Tsuyu, with her usual calmness, moved a little closer to Melissa and asked curiously, "Melissa-chan, earlier All Might Sensei mentioned you didn't have a quirk, but clearly, you do." An uncomfortable silence spread across the nearby seats. Everyone had heard the question, and more than one person was curious about the answer. Melissa, sitting by the window, didn't take her eyes off the sky. She sighed softly before turning her gaze toward the group of students watching her. All Might is right. I don't have a quirk. The words dropped like a bombshell. Even Aizawa, who was at the front of the bus with his arms crossed, half opened his eyes in disbelief. Then, what was that power you showed? What were those lightning bolts? Asked Kirishima with clear amazement. Melissa lowered her gaze and extended her hand. Slowly, a crystal-like jewel materialized in her palm, with a lightning symbol surrounded by circles. The energy around her crackled faintly. What I have is the authority of lightning, she explained in a neutral tone. Though I like to call it electro-vision. The astonishment on the students' faces was palpable. The jewel glowed with a faint light, emitting small sparks that disappeared into the air. How strong does it make you? Asked Ida, adjusting his glasses nervously. It depends, Melissa replied without emotion. Can you control the lightning at will? Intervened Uraraka, leaning slightly forward. Yes. Each answer was short, direct, without revealing too much. She didn't seem interested in explaining herself more than necessary. Katsumi, who had been listening until that moment, finally joined the conversation with a serious expression. How did you get that power? She asked bluntly. Beside her, Kaido was also watching her. His face now bore an X-shaped scar, an indelible reminder of his humiliation in the tournament. Melissa shifted her gaze toward Katsumi, her blue eyes reflecting absolute calm. Without changing her tone of voice, she answered naturally, "This power was granted to me by my master." Katsumi clenched her fists tightly. That word again. My master. Now she knew. Now she was completely sure. Melissa was talking about Izuku. But how was that possible? Izuku didn't have a quirk. How could he have given Melissa so much power? The idea was absurd, impossible. And yet, there was the living proof of the contrary. Mina, who had also been listening to the conversation, leaned slightly toward Shuka and whispered quietly. Did you hear that? She said, my master, again. This is too weird, Shuka. Don't you think it's interesting? Shuka didn't respond immediately. She knew the truth, as both she and Melissa served the same man, but she had no obligation to solve the other's doubts. I don't know. But Melissa isn't ordinary. Her power is terrifying. Imagine how strong the person she serves must be. Mina swallowed, feeling a chill run down her spine. She hadn't thought about it that way. I don't know. But I have a bad feeling about this. But Melissa didn't pay attention to the inquisitive looks or the murmurs around her. She simply continued to gaze at the landscape with a slight smile. Her life had changed for the better since meeting Izuku. Since meeting him, her master. She no longer had the scars on her face. Many wondered how they had healed, how the large mark on her face had disappeared. But she never answered. She owed no explanations to anyone. Not even to her own father when he tried to confront her. However, that smile on her face wasn't just for her. There was something else, something much more important. Izuku had kept the other promise he made to her. He had saved her mother. Flashback. The UA Sports Festival was still in full swing, but they had moved away from the event. The sunset sky stretched out in shades of orange and gold as Izuku floated with an almost unnatural calm, holding Shuka's hand. She, on the other hand, still couldn't understand how it was possible that he was suspended in the air with no visible support. Her body trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the uncertainty gnawing at her inside. Not far away, the hospital where her mother was staying loomed, a constant reminder of the weight of her past. Izuku looked at her calmly, his eyes glowing with a strange intensity. "Tell me, Shuka. I have 2 solutions for you, but it's up to you which one you choose." Shuka stared at him, listening intently to every word. "Solutions? What do you mean?" Izuku kept his gaze on her. "From what you've told me, your mother is mentally unstable. She endured a life of fear under Endeavor's rule. What they did to her wasn't fair. So I offer you 2 paths." Shuka felt her breath becoming heavier, but she didn't look away. "I'm listening." Izuku raised one finger. "The first option, I can use my eyes to induce a powerful illusion, force her to face her fears, to fight them until she overcomes them. That will make her stronger, free her." He raised another finger. "The second option, I'll erase all memories of her pain. She'll only keep the memories of your existence. It'll be as if she's never suffered. As if nothing ever happened." Shuka felt a lump in her throat. The second option sounded so easy. So tempting. Her mother could be happy again. She could live without pain, without trauma. But something inside her told her that it wasn't right. She couldn't just erase the past. Her mother was strong. She had always been. She closed her eyes for a moment, making a decision. "I want to help my mother face her problem. I want to help her overcome her fear." Izuku smiled with approval, as if he had expected that answer. Extending his hand, a dark and glowing portal opened before them. Shuka felt a shiver as she saw it, but without hesitation, she followed Izuku inside. Once they crossed through it, they found themselves in the hallways of a hospital. The place was lit with cold lights, and the sound of footsteps and whispers echoed in the background, but something wasn't right. No one paid attention to them, no one even looked at them. Shuka furrowed her brow, observing her surroundings with unease. "Why can't anyone see us?" she asked, her voice filled with a mix of surprise and doubt. Izuku, with a serene expression, turned to her. "My eyes have powers you wouldn't understand, but to put it simply, everyone is in an illusion. To them, everything seems normal, except they can't see us here." Shuka swallowed hard. Izuku could do things that were beyond her comprehension, but every time she saw him in action, her trust in him grew even stronger. They continued walking down the hallway until they stopped in front of a door with a sign that read, "Rei Todoroki." Shuka felt a lump in her throat. Her hands trembled slightly as her gaze lingered on the door. She couldn't remember the last time she had seen her mother truly conscious. After the incident in her childhood, her mother had completely lost her sanity. When she tried to visit her, she only received screams. Her mother didn't look at her, but at the monster of her father reflected in her eyes. Over the years, her mother had calmed down, but that empty expression and lost gaze still remained. Izuku noticed her fear, and with a gentle gesture, placed his hand on Shuka's head, ruffling her hair a bit. "Don't worry, as long as you're with me, I'll make the impossible possible." She let out a low laugh. It was truly absurd. She had met Izuku at an unexpected moment, and within hours, he had done more for her than anyone else had in her entire life. Shuka moved closer to him and nestled her head against his chest, feeling his warmth. I know I can count on you." She took a deep breath, and with renewed determination, pushed open the door. As she did, a nurse inside the room instinctively turned around, noticing that the door had opened. She frowned, but upon seeing no one, felt an inexplicable chill. Without saying a word, she left the room as if something had driven her to do so. Inside, Rei Todoroki was sitting on the bed, her gaze fixed on the floor. Her empty eyes reflected nothingness, her body barely moved. She breathed, but her presence was that of an empty shell. Her skin was paler than before, her hair was messy, and it lacked the shine it once had. Her life, if it could even be called that, had been a living hell. She was sold to a monstrous man to pay off her family's debt, used as a tool to give birth to children with powerful quirks. She tried to endure it for the sake of her children, but losing her firstborn and seeing her daughter abused without being able to do anything destroyed her. And when her mind finally couldn't take it anymore, the incident happened. That day, she still remembered the worried expression on Shuka's face. But her mind was too disturbed, her perception of reality distorted. Then, without thinking, driven by fear and desperation, she threw a pot of boiling water. At her own daughter. At her baby. Every day, she relived that moment. Her daughter screaming in agony, her heart breaking, her mind shattering. She couldn't bear it. She was no longer anything more than a ghost in her own body. "I'm a terrible mother." Then, she heard a voice. "It's not true." Rei shuddered at the sound of that voice. "You're not a terrible mother. It was just a mistake, but your intention was never to hurt her." She smiled bitterly. Now she was hearing voices. She was definitely losing her mind. But then, she felt something. Warmth. Not just in her mind, but in her heart. Something soft and delicate surrounded her, like a warm breeze on a cold night. She slowly lifted her gaze and saw her. In front of her was her little girl, her eyes clouded with tears. For a moment, she saw her husband reflected in her, but a strange feeling in her mind forced her to look deeper. It wasn't him. It was her daughter. Her little one, the one she had hurt, was there, holding her weak, fragile hands with immense affection. Her trembling fingers gently wrapped around hers as if trying to convey all the love she felt. There was no hatred in her eyes. No resentment. Only sadness and love. Silent tears rolled down Rei's cheeks. Her throat tightened, and her chest ached with every beat. She wanted to speak, wanted to say something, but her mind was too damaged. All she could think of was how much she had hurt her daughter, how much it would be better to let her go, to leave her forever. She didn't deserve her love, she didn't deserve her forgiveness. She didn't deserve to live. But then, an overwhelming presence filled the room. Izuku, standing next to Shuka, observed them in silence. His eyes, which were once a deep purple with concentric circles, changed. 3 black tomo appeared in them, spinning until they transformed into a 6-pointed spiral. Tsukuyami. The words resonated in the room, and in an instant, everything changed. Suddenly, both Shuka and Rei were no longer in the hospital room. They now found themselves in an ethereal world, where light and darkness mixed like waves in the ocean. Around them, fragments of Rei's memories floated like shattered mirrors, showing scenes from her past. Images of her life, her suffering, her pain, surrounded her completely. The coldness of her marriage, the pressure from her family, the desperation of watching her children suffer. Then, the scene shifted to the day everything fell apart. The heart-wrenching scream of a child echoed through the air. The younger version of Shuka was on the floor, writhing as she held her face. The pot of boiling water that Rei had thrown lay in pieces on the ground. The image was so real, so painful, that Rei's heart shattered. "No, no, no," she screamed, clutching her head. "Kami, what have I done? What have I done?" Izuku, who had been watching her with an unreadable expression, observed the scene in silence before speaking calmly. His voice directed itself to Shuka, who, with horror in her eyes, witnessed her mother reliving that fateful day. "What you're seeing is what she sees every day," he said without looking away from the scene. "She blames herself for what she did. She can't move on because she believes she'll never earn your forgiveness." Shuka felt the air leave her lungs. Her body trembled, unable to look away from her mother's suffering. "What do I do?" she whispered, her voice broken with despair. "How do I help her?" But when she turned to look at Izuku, he was no longer there. His voice resonated in her mind, firm and definitive. "Only you can save her." Shuka felt her heart stop. She turned back to the scene and saw her mother, crying desperately for what she had done. Each sob was like a knife stabbing her soul. She moved closer, unable to bear seeing her mother suffer any longer. She wanted to bring her mother back, to return the peace she so desperately needed. "I miss you, Oka-san." Rei's eyes widened in surprise. Her little girl, her sweet daughter, was standing in front of her. She was no longer a child, but a young woman. Her gaze was filled with pain, but also with love. Tears ran down her cheeks as she took a step back. "Please, don't stay away from me anymore. I've missed you all this time." Rei's heart clenched. She covered her mouth with both hands as her body trembled. A stifled sob escaped her lips. "Shuka." She, too, cried. Her legs gave out, and she fell to her knees, unable to contain the torrent of emotions that overwhelmed her. Her guilt, her pain, her shame. Everything exploded into a heartbreaking sob. She covered her face with her hands, unable to meet her daughter's gaze. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she repeated over and over, her voice trembling with desperation. "I'm such a horrible mother. I hurt you so much." Shuka knelt in front of her and, without hesitation, hugged her tightly. Rei shuddered at the sensation of the contact, as if her cold skin were melting under the warmth of her daughter. Her heart raced, overwhelmed by emotions she had suppressed for years. "I don't want to lose you again," she whispered into her shoulder, as more tears fell down her face. "I want you here, with me. Please, Oka-san." Rei, trembling, wrapped her arms around her daughter for the first time in years. Feeling her fragility and at the same time her strength, she choked back a sob. "I'm sorry, darling, I'm sorry for being weak," she murmured, her voice broken by tears. Shuka hugged her tighter, as if fearing that if she let go, her mother would vanish. It's okay," she whispered, gently caressing her back in an attempt to calm her distress. The tremor in Rei's body slowly eased, and her breathing, though still irregular, began to stabilize. Then, a soft sound broke the silence. Shuka had started to hum. A sweet and melancholic melody filled the air. Rei felt her chest tighten. It was a familiar melody, one she hadn't heard in years. The lullaby she used to sing to her little one when she woke up crying in the middle of the night from nightmares. Nostalgia hit her with overwhelming force. She closed her eyes in despair, feeling a lump in her throat, a deep pain for all those years she let slip away, for every moment she would never get back. But when she opened her eyes, she saw her daughter smile, that pure and sincere expression that didn't blame her but loved her despite everything that had happened. The lump in her throat dissolved, and with a tremor in her lips, she began to sing along with her. Their voices intertwined in a broken harmony, but one filled with love. "I will always love you, my snowflake," she whispered at the end of the song. Then, the scene changed. Snowflakes began to fall around them, and inside each one, moments from the past were reflected. She saw her most precious memories, holding her children when they were babies, teaching them how to read and write, helping Shuka make origami. Everything she had forgotten in her pain was there, showing her that her life hadn't only been suffering, but also moments of love, of joy, and that she could fight for them again. Shuka looked at her, and Rei, somewhat awkwardly, smiled for the first time in years. It wasn't a perfect smile, since it had been so long since she had smiled, but it was genuine. The landscape lit up, and in the blink of an eye, they both returned to the hospital. Rei rushed into her daughter's arms, clinging to her with desperate intensity. "I love you, little one, you don't know how much I love you," she sobbed into her hair. "I love you too, Oka-san," Shuka replied, gently stroking her back. It was then that Rei looked up and noticed a young man with white hair standing near them. There was something about him that commanded respect, but not with violence or brutality like her husband, but with an overwhelming calm, as if nothing in the world could disturb him. Between sobs, Rei wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and fixed her gaze on him. "I suppose you have something to do with this, don't you?" Izuku nodded serenely. "You're right." After that, Izuku, at Shuka's and Rei's request, took her to his castle. The woman, still fragile and marked by suffering, preferred being with Izuku over returning home. It had been a tough decision, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel completely alone. Izuku promised her he would help her overcome her insecurities and heal the mental scars that still remained. He also assured her that he would restore her health, as her physical condition was worrying. Before parting ways, mother and daughter embraced one last time. Shuka buried her face in Rei's chest, feeling her warmth, and tears rolled down both their cheeks. They didn't want to let go, but they knew this wasn't goodbye, it was a new beginning. End of flashback. Shaking her head, Shuka returned to the present as the truck they were traveling in came to a stop. They had arrived at the forest where the special training would take place. Everyone out. Aizawa ordered, his usual monotone voice carrying authority. The students disembarked, adjusting their uniforms and mentally preparing for the next test. They didn't have much time to relax, as the wild pussycats appeared before them. Mandalay, Pixie Bob, Ragdoll, and Tiger greeted them energetically. "Welcome to the training field." Pixie Bob exclaimed with excitement. "Hope you're ready to sweat." "Actually, your training starts now," Mandalay said with a mischievous smile, pointing to the huge cliff ahead of them. "Your first task, get to the camp on the other side of the forest. On your own." Before anyone could protest, the ground shook violently, and massive beasts of earth emerged, roaring fiercely. "Good luck," Ragdoll said, sending them ruthlessly toward the abyss. The air was quickly filled with surprised screams as the students fell. The moment they hit the ground, the battle began. Mandalay's beasts attacked mercilessly, but the UA students fought back with strength. Melissa moved at a dizzying speed, her sword gleaming with each precise cut she made. With a purple flash, she jumped onto one of the creatures and sliced it in two with a single motion. "These things are nothing," she said in a calm voice. Beside her, Shuka wielded her ice with impressive mastery. With a single motion of her hand, she froze 3 beasts at once, rendering them immobile. "Just keep moving forward," she told her teammates. "We can't waste time here." Katsumi advanced with controlled explosions, propelling herself through the air and knocking down the creatures with powerful blasts. "Get out of my way, bastards," she roared, destroying another beast with an explosive punch. Kaido, for his part, let the one for all flow through his body. With each punch, the ground shook, and the beasts were torn apart as if they were made of paper. "I can't fall behind," he shouted, running forward to avoid being the last. After a tough battle, they finally managed to get through the forest and reach the camp. But the real challenge came a few days later. That night, everything seemed calm. The students were relaxing after a tiring day, some enjoying the campfire while others participated in the bravery test organized by the Pussycats. No one suspected that something terrible was about to happen. Suddenly, an explosion shook the camp. Screams of alarm filled the air as shadowy figures emerged from the darkness. The League of Villains had arrived. A dense gas began to spread across the area. Mustard, a villain with a gas mask, smiled as he watched the students fall unconscious one by one. "Too easy," he murmured with satisfaction. But before he could celebrate, a purple flash cut through the mist. Melissa appeared out of nowhere, her sword in hand, and without hesitation, she slashed through the poisonous gas. Her hair turned completely purple, and her eyes glowed with electric energy. "You're not touching any of them," she declared coldly. In the distance, Pixie Bob was knocked down by Magna, who struck her brutally. Meanwhile, a Nomu pounced on Ragdoll. Shuka turned around and saw how Katsumi was fighting multiple villains at once, but then, "Take her." Dabi's voice echoed through the night. 2 villains lunged at Katsumi, and before she could react, a dark shadow enveloped her. "No!" Shuka shouted, running toward her. But it was too late. Katsumi had disappeared. Fury spread across Melissa's face. Her energy surged with terrifying intensity. Her sword, now completely surrounded by a purple aura, seemed to absorb the light around her. "Eternity will not be defeated," she whispered. In the blink of an eye, her figure vanished and reappeared in front of the Nomu. Her speed was overwhelming, almost unreal. One swift movement of her sword was enough to defeat the creature. Boom! The sound of destruction shook the air. She had unleashed one of her most powerful techniques, Void Slash. A blinding glow lit up the night, and in an instant, the Nomu ceased to exist. There was no trace, no ashes, no fragments of its regenerating body. Only the void. The ground itself cracked under the immense pressure of her attack, leaving a deep fissure as a testament to her power. Before the villains could react, Melissa moved again, disarming and immobilizing several of them in seconds. "I won't let you get away with this," she said in an annoyed voice. The balance tilted in favor of the heroes, and when all the villains were captured, Aizawa approached and grabbed Shigaraki by the shirt. "Tell me where the student you kidnapped is," he demanded, his voice full of rage, feeling guilty for not being strong enough to protect his students. Shigaraki let out a sick laugh, his mocking tone echoing through the area. "Hee hee. How foolish. Sensei will come if you don't let me go," he whispered with a twisted smile, enjoying the furious glares from the heroes. "Funny you should say that," said a deep, emotionless voice. Everyone looked up and saw a young man with white hair and eyes of a disturbingly unique shade. Mina, being the most observant, squinted and whispered in surprise. "Kaito. Is it just me or does he look a bit like you?" Kaido's jaw dropped, completely frozen. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. In front of him, looking down on them with an air of superiority, was his twin brother, the one who supposedly had no quirk. But now, he could clearly see that he did. The young man extended his hand, and around them, 4 figures appeared, surrounded by an aura of intimidating power. The shock was immediate. Aizawa went on high alert as he recognized one of them, Lady Nagant, a fugitive. But what really made everyone tense was the presence of Ryukyu and Mirko. The atmosphere grew heavy, and worry was evident on the faces of the heroes. It was then that Mirko dropped an unconscious figure to the ground. It was Katsumi, whom they had rescued and brought back. "You're welcome," Mirko said indifferently, brushing her hands off. "So relax, Aizawa. We're not enemies," she assured with a dangerous smile before narrowing her eyes. "But if you attack us, I'll consider you an enemy." Aizawa didn't lower his guard. "I don't understand what's going on, but you're not leaving until you explain what's happening," he said, his voice tense and authoritative. Mirko smiled with amusement. Slowly, she raised her hand and licked her lips with an expression that froze everyone's blood. "I'll show you something fun my master gave me," she said, her tone dripping with malice. She made a simple gesture with her fingers, and instantly, all the heroes fell to the ground, feeling an overwhelming weight crush them. It was as if gravity itself had turned against them. Some groaned in pain, others struggled to get up, but it was in vain. Ryukyu placed a hand on Mirko's shoulder, her voice calm but authoritative. "Stop. Our mission is over." She then looked directly at Aizawa. "Tell Nizu there is no more League of Villains. And that AFO no longer exists." The heroes who knew of his existence were left speechless. AFO was so powerful that even All Might had been fatally wounded in their last confrontation. The idea that he had simply ceased to exist was inconceivable. Aizawa swallowed, unable to process the information. "How is that possible?" he murmured in disbelief. His gaze fixed on Izuku, who remained unfazed in the air. "Did you do this?" Izuku shook his head. "He didn't pose any challenge to me. So I let my women handle everything," he replied indifferently. Shuka, who hadn't said a word until then, walked toward the 4th figure. Her heart raced with excitement as she recognized her. It was her mother. Rei looked in better shape, almost as if she had rejuvenated. There was something different in her posture, in her expression. She looked free. "Hi, Oka-san," Shuka greeted softly, her voice filled with conflicting emotions. Silence fell over the area for a few seconds until some of the heroes couldn't help but whisper to each other. "Her mother," Kirishima said in shock. "Now that I think about it, they look pretty alike." Mina commented, surprised. "I never imagined Rei Todoroki would be here." Aizawa muttered, still on the ground. Mother and daughter stared at each other for a few seconds. Rei stepped forward, a hint of shyness on her face. "I'm better now. Thanks to Izuku, I severed any ties with Endeavor." Then, with a slight blush on her cheeks, she lowered her voice and murmured somewhat embarrassed. "I'm also his wife now." Shuka's eyes widened in surprise, unsure how to react. But in the end, she simply sighed and smiled. "As long as you're well and happy. Then I see no problem." Without saying a word, Izuku opened a black portal with a simple gesture of his hand. Mirko had already stopped using the ability Izuku granted her to free everyone from their gravity prison. Before they could go through it, Aizawa threw his capture tape, grabbing Izuku's arm. At the same time, he activated his quirk, confident he had nullified Izuku's ability. "You're not leaving that easily," he growled sternly. Izuku looked at him with a mix of boredom and disdain, as if he had already anticipated what was going to happen. With unsettling calm, he raised his hand and murmured softly, almost as if exerting no effort at all. "Shinra Tensei." The moment the words left his mouth, an invisible wave of energy erupted from his palm, so powerful it seemed to tear the very air itself. Aizawa didn't have time to react before being launched through the air with brutal force. His body was propelled backward as if it were a mere leaf carried by the wind. He crashed through several trees with a deafening crack, the trunks breaking as if they were paper upon impact. The sound of destruction was terrifying. Finally, Aizawa hit the ground with a loud thud, the impact resonating throughout the area. A groan of pain escaped his lips as his body collapsed heavily. He was soaked in blood and gasping for air. He tried to get up, but his muscles wouldn't respond as they should, the pain unbearable, making movement almost impossible. "Sensei." Mina's voice echoed in his ears, but his vision was blurred, and confusion clouded his mind. The students, stunned, watched the scene in despair. "Aizawa-sensei." Uraraka shouted, her eyes filled with worry as she saw her teacher on the ground. Kirishima, his face tense, could hardly believe what had just happened. "This can't be. That was too much." Izuku didn't even look at him as he disappeared into the portal. The other women followed him. Before leaving, Rei turned to her daughter and gave her a smile. "Take care, sweetie." And with that, she vanished with Izuku and the others. The news quickly exploded across Japan. Headlines on every channel, special reports, and endless debates flooded television and social media. Izuku Otsutsuki, along with several renowned heroines, had defeated All for One. However, the most shocking thing wasn't just his victory, but the dark secrets that came to light. Irrefutable evidence of All for One's atrocities was exposed, showing how many high-ranking heroes had ignored or even allowed his crimes for political convenience. The public's trust in the hero society shook. What was once seen as a battle between good and evil turned into a much grayer landscape. It was also revealed that One for All existed and how All Might had passed it on to his firstborn while growing increasingly weak. At UA the tension could be cut with a knife. All Might slammed his fist on the table with such force that the wood cracked. In front of him, the top 20 professional heroes were gathered, called in urgently after the information leak. "Why Izuku? Why him?" he roared, his eyes overflowing with frustration and confusion. The other heroes remained silent, avoiding his gaze. Not only was the young man who had disappeared a year ago All Might's son, but he had proven to be more powerful than anyone could have imagined. Even more so, his wife, Inko, who was sitting on the other side of the table, didn't seem upset or disappointed. She smiled with pride. Izuku had returned. Not as the helpless boy everyone had underestimated, but as a leader capable of doing what no one else dared to do. Nizu, who had remained silent until then, took a sip of his tea and observed the heroes present. Finally, he exhaled slowly and narrowed his eyes cautiously. Before he could speak, the door opened, and two figures entered with complete ease. Mirko, with her typical challenging smile, and Ryukyu, with her usual serene but firm demeanor. Both crossed the room as if nothing were wrong. "Hello, Rat," Mirko greeted with a mocking smile, placing her hands on her hips. Ryukyu simply nodded slightly in a respectful gesture. "Director Nizu, fellow heroes." All Might stood up abruptly, his rage barely contained. With a roar, he grabbed the table and threw it with all his strength toward them. Ryukyu's eyes glowed with a celestial blue light for a moment, and with a simple gesture of her hand, the table disintegrated into hundreds of perfect little cubes that fell to the floor like sand. The silence in the room was absolute. It wasn't her power. Something had changed in her. Nizu narrowed his eyes and, in a neutral voice, asked, "Mirko. Ryukyu. I hope you have a good explanation for your recent change in affiliation." Ryukyu spoke calmly. "You called us here to interrogate us, right? Go ahead. Ask whatever you want. Are you aware of the damage this has caused to the hero's image?" Nizu waved his hand toward the monitors, where the news continued to play. Japan is on the brink of a crisis of trust. Society is questioning whether the heroes are really protecting them, or if they've just been playing gods while ignoring the real threat. Mirko scoffed, crossing her arms. And isn't that true? All for One had been manipulating everything from the shadows for decades, and you knew about it. But you did nothing. You just let things happen until they became unsustainable. It's not that simple. Endeavor roared, standing up in fury. We follow rules, we follow procedures. We can't just take justice into our own hands like Izuku did, like you did. Mirko looked at him mockingly. And what good did your rules do? All for One died without even being a challenge for Izuku or for us. All you did was maintain the status quo, letting the problem grow until he solved it. Nizu sighed and looked back at Ryukyu. Tell me, do you really believe what you did was right? Ryukyu held his gaze. Yes. There is no doubt in my mind. Now Japan is safer than it has ever been. All Might, still furious. And what about One for All? Its existence was revealed. The enemies left in the shadows will now covet it even more. Mirko smiled slightly. One for All is no longer a problem. It's not the power that will determine the fate of the world. And if anyone wants it, they'll have to go through Izuku. The atmosphere grew even tenser. Nizu observed both of them with a calculating look, as if analyzing every word, every gesture. Finally, with another sip of tea, he spoke with serenity. I won't stop you. But know that, from now on, you're not on the side of the official heroes. The government and the Hero Association won't recognize you as allies. Mirko let out a laugh and shrugged. We don't need their approval. We did our job, and I'm not going to wait for a bunch of mummies with no backbone to tell us what to do, especially when they themselves tremble at the moment of action. With that, they turned and began to leave the room. Just before crossing the door, Ryukyu stopped and looked at Nizu one last time. Tell your heroes to get ready. Izuku is not done with this world yet. With those words, they both left the meeting, leaving behind a deathly silence. Fear settled in everyone present. They knew things were about to change, and it wouldn't be for their benefit. They weren't wrong. Soon after, Izuku and his women stormed into Japan's largest news station. Now, the entire country was watching them. Izuku, standing before the cameras, his presence commanding and his gaze as sharp as knives, made sure his message reached every corner of the nation. All these years, it wasn't just the heroes who made mistakes, each one of you did too. His statement took everyone by surprise. Confusion and bewilderment spread through the crowd. Why trust others with your safety? Why blindly support someone? Rei, standing by his side, nodded and activated the transmission on the giant screens across Japan. The image shifted, showing secretly captured footage of heroes committing atrocious acts, thefts, extortion, abuse of power, harassment of girls who dreamed of becoming heroines, human trafficking, and drug dealing. Citizens felt sick as they witnessed the reality that had been hidden from them for so long. A murmur of disbelief swept through the crowd, quickly turning into shouts of outrage. This can't be. The heroes did this, a man in the crowd exclaimed, his face twisted in shock. They've been lying to us, an elderly woman murmured, bringing a trembling hand to her mouth. Look at this. Even Endeavor is in one of the recordings, a young man shouted, pointing to the screen, where the hero was seen harassing a woman late at night. The image changed to a secret meeting where the president of the Hero Association was seen gathering with important figures, discussing how to cover up these crimes. The silence was suffocating for a few seconds, until an angry voice shattered the tension. They've been using us, a man in a construction company uniform roared. They made us believe they were symbols of justice, but they were just rats hiding their filth. The president of the Hero Association, bound with thick chains to a chair, struggled in fury. His face, flushed with anger and shame, reflected his helplessness as all of Japan watched him. You don't understand, brat, he shouted, his voice full of desperation. It's not as easy as you make it sound. If all of this came to light, society would collapse. Fear kept order. We protected this country our way. Protect? Rei's voice echoed cold and full of contempt. You call that protecting? Allowing men like Endeavor to destroy lives and hide behind the mask of justice? The cameras focused on several prominent heroes in the footage, their faces twisted in horror as they saw themselves exposed. "This is a lie. This must be manipulation," a hero shouted from the crowd, but his voice was drowned out by the boos of the citizens. "Then explain it. Explain it if you have the guts," a furious young man challenged, pointing to the screen. "Because what I see here is the truth. And you, just like them, are an accomplice." The shouts of fury intensified. The citizens weren't just outraged, they were ready to tear down the false heroes who had betrayed them. Izuku fixed his gaze on the camera, with an imposing aura that silenced any protest. "But the greatest sin you committed was the discrimination against the quirks you considered villainous. All those taunts and rejections led hundreds down the wrong path." The screens showed children crying, hiding in fear of their own quirks. Some of them appeared as adults, turned into criminals by the disdain they had suffered since childhood. "The world did nothing, so I took it upon myself to create an organization to help those who were humiliated because of their quirks and those abandoned and marginalized for being born without one." Izuku stepped aside, and the camera focused on a beautiful woman dressed elegantly, with blonde hair, yellow eyes with animal-like pupils, and a wide smile. The audience held their breath. She was Himiko Toga, a villain wanted for multiple crimes. She had to live her childhood hiding and fighting against her own quirk until she couldn't take it anymore. No one helped her, no one understood her. Before Izuku could continue, Toga interrupted him with a quick kiss on the lips, laughing softly. "That's not true. You helped me. I still have a lot to improve, but now I have a purpose." Toga looked directly into the camera, her expression serious and sincere. "If there's anyone out there who needs a helping hand, a hug, or simply needs to hear that everything will be okay, I'll be there for you. Just like they helped me, I want to help everyone who thinks it's better to give up and let others be right. But let me tell you, you are not useless, your quirk doesn't define who you are." The networks exploded with comments of disbelief and reflection. Some were crying, others clinging to their anger, but no one could ignore the truth. Izuku spoke again, his voice resonating with firmness and defiance. "Japan, tell me, what has your symbol of peace really done for you? Do you really think punching villains over and over is enough?" His gaze grew even more piercing as he turned toward the camera, raising his hand and pointing with an accusing finger. He did nothing. With all his fame, with all his power, he could have changed thousands of lives, he could have rebuilt this rotten society from its foundations. But instead, he chose the easy path. He chose to pose for the cameras, smile, and dish out punches, while corruption grew right beneath his shadow. His expression hardened, his words falling like a sentence. "To me, All Might is not a hero. He's just another villain, disguised in a shiny costume." A deathly silence took over all of Japan. The words echoed in every corner of the country, striking deep in the hearts of those who still believed in the symbol of peace. But before they could even process them, an explosion shook the place. The roar was deafening. A whole wall exploded into pieces, scattering dust and debris across the room. And from the destruction emerged an imposing figure, a shadow amidst the cloud of dust. All Might. But not the All Might who inspired hope. Not the hero with the unbreakable smile. No. This All Might had a gaze consumed by fury, his brow furrowed and his muscles tensed as if holding back a volcanic rage. "Enough with the lies," he roared, his voice thundering like a storm. The citizens watching the broadcast felt a chill run down their spines. Some even instinctively stepped back, despite being miles away. The hero they admired. Was he really a hero? All Might raised his fist and slammed it down with force. Detroit smash. The gust of wind it created was devastating. The cameras shook violently, the giant screens filled with static for a few seconds. Screams and the sound of falling debris mixed with the buzzing of the interrupted signal. And then, the image returned. It no longer showed the interior of the building. Now, the broadcast came from a drone floating among the rubble. "Look at this, Japan," a calm and cold voice echoed through the speakers. "The man who was supposed to be your symbol of peace, the one who should represent justice, resorting to violence without hesitation. Is this how a true hero behaves?" The crowd watched in shock as the scene unfolded. The imposing structure of the news headquarters, where Izuku had spoken, was now a pile of ruins and dust. And in the middle of the disaster, a tall, muscular figure remained still, with his fist still raised. All Might. His chest heaved with uncontrolled fury, his expression no longer held the radiant smile that always characterized him. His face was twisted, eyes bloodshot, and his jaw clenched so tightly that it seemed he was about to break his teeth. The great symbol of peace, Japan's most beloved hero, had just destroyed an entire building without caring if there were more people inside. The citizens watching from their homes felt a chill run down their spines. On the streets, the giant screens broadcasting the event showed pedestrians frozen in place, unable to believe what their eyes were seeing. What did he just do? Murmured a woman, holding her young son, who was watching the screen with fear in his eyes. But there were people still inside, shouted a man, stepping back as if the image itself were going to swallow him. This can't be. He wouldn't do something like this, exclaimed another, his face pale. Social media exploded instantly. Frenzied messages flooded forums and news platforms. Was that All Might? Was it really him? Tell me it's a montage. That it's fake. He destroyed the building. With a single punch. But why? What the hell is happening? Is that our hero? The drone camera slowly zoomed in to focus on All Might's face. His breathing turned into a growl, his chest pounding with contained rage. And then, as if Japan itself were judging him, his reflection appeared on one of the few intact windows of the building he had destroyed. What he saw made him take a step back. His fists were still trembling. His wide, panicked eyes made him look like a cornered beast. His lips, once curved into the emblematic smile of hope, were now twisted into a grimace of desperation. For the first time in his life, Toshinori Yagi saw what the others were seeing. He was not a hero. He was just a broken man who had just proven to the world that Izuku was right. The silence that followed was deafening. The networks crashed, the media didn't know how to react, and the government heroes were in crisis. All Might, the great pillar of society, had lost control live on air, destroying a building full of journalists and innocent people. His image was no longer that of a symbol of hope, but that of a defeated man, cornered by the truth. Izuku watched it all from a hidden screen in his new headquarters in Japan, his purple eyes with glowing rings shining with satisfaction. Rei, Himiko, and the others were with him, watching the chaos unfold in real time. And thus falls an empire, murmured Rei, crossing her arms with a slight smile. Thanks to Izuku's influence, she had finally made her husband pay. She had taken away what he loved most, his prestige, his place among the top heroes. Now he was nothing more than a criminal whose existence would never again see the light of day. Himiko stretched lazily, but her face reflected great satisfaction. People can't look away anymore. Before, they only believed the lies they were given, now they're seeing the truth with their own eyes. Izuku smiled faintly. This is just the beginning. That day marked the official birth of their organization. It was no longer just him and his women. Now they had the support of independent heroes who had abandoned the hypocrisy of the system. Himiko's organization was also flourishing. People from all over the world were joining their cause, discriminated mutants, individuals without quirks who had been marginalized, former villains seeking a second chance. The governments tried to stop them, but it was too late. Izuku had cultivated ties with leaders from other countries, and his influence was unstoppable. Trying to eliminate him was no longer an option. Japan belonged to him, even if his enemies refused to accept it. But there was still one piece left on the board. Katsumi Bakugo. However, before dealing with her, Izuku opened a portal and stepped through the threshold without hesitation. On the other side, the air was humid and dense, the twilight barely broken by the faint glow of bioluminescent moss. He was in a cave. The same cave where his fate had changed a year ago. In front of him, a colossal flower stood majestically, with petals of an indescribable color. Izuku observed it in silence, letting the memories engulf him. He remembered how he had arrived at this place, malnourished, powerless, on the brink of surrender. He had fallen to his knees, his body broken, his spirit at its limit. And right at that moment, he saw it. A strange-looking fruit hung from the enormous plant, glowing with an ethereal radiance. He ate it. And in that moment, he ceased to be what he was. He ceased to be human. Something inside him changed. His body transformed, endowed with a power that no quirk in history could match. But that wasn't all. A torrent of unfathomable knowledge poured into his mind, beyond what any human could imagine. In that moment, he understood his purpose. He wasn't just a survivor. He was chosen. It was then that he began searching for those who would walk by his side. Women who shared his vision. His sole goal, to change the world that had treated him like garbage. Izuku smiled faintly and extended his hand, reverently stroking the thick stem of the immense plant. "Old friend. I've done great things. And I owe it all to you." He slowly moved away, leaving behind the cave that had witnessed his rebirth. But before moving forward, there was still an unresolved matter. Someone from his past. The girl who had rejected him. The girl who had chosen his brother over him. The wind gently blew in the Bakugo family courtyard. Katsumi was sitting on an old swing, swaying slowly, her gaze lost in the ground. Her relationship with Kaido was a complete disaster. Since her defeat at Melissa's hands, her pride had been severely wounded. But what truly crushed her was the fight with Shuka, a fight she had requested herself after learning of Shuka's closeness with Izuku. She wanted to know if she too had received some power from him. However, what she expected to be a simple test of superiority turned into her worst humiliation. The defeat against Melissa had been embarrassing, but what Shuka did to her was a real nightmare. By the end of the fight, her body was covered in blood, her limbs trapped by pillars that completely immobilized her. But the worst, the most humiliating part, was being left completely naked, exposed to a crowd of passers-by who quickly captured the scene and spread it on social media. That day, her confidence shattered. However, what consumed her the most was Izuku. Her younger brother. The same boy everyone had looked at with pity and contempt. The one she had belittled, insulted, and considered a worthless failure with no future. But now, the reality was completely different. He had become an imposing figure, a leader with unshakable followers and an army ready to fight for his cause. The same man who had humiliated her father. The one who had defeated All Might and unmasked him in front of all of Japan as the false hero he truly was. Tisk. Katsumi gritted her teeth in frustration, her grip on the swing's chains tightening. She clearly remembered the day Kaido, blinded by his pride, entered Izuku's headquarters to challenge him. But even Izuku hadn't bothered to face him. Rei, the weakest of Izuku's women, destroyed him effortlessly. The worst part was seeing the difference in their levels. Kaido, with all his training in One for All, couldn't even make her break a sweat. Rei humiliated him with a calm smile, and when it was over, she simply turned her back on him, as if he wasn't even worth finishing off. After that day, Kaido was never the same. The humiliation consumed him, transforming into an obsession. He trained relentlessly, day and night, with an intensity that bordered on desperation, as if his very existence depended on it. Then came that fateful day. They were at UA, in a training area destroyed by Kaido's countless punches. His body was covered in bruises and wounds, his muscles trembling from the effort. He was using One for All beyond his limits, punching and kicking debris with deadly ferocity. Katsumi, worried, approached him. "Honey, you've been training for 10 hours. Please, take a break." Kaido spun around sharply, his gaze burning with fury. "Shut up. I need to get stronger, more powerful. I'll be number one no matter what." Katsumi looked at him with a mix of anger and sadness. She had endured days of the same, but this time, she couldn't hold back. "Stop already. Even if you train this hard, you'll never beat Izuku." The world seemed to stop. Kaido's eyes widened, reflecting pure, incandescent rage. Then, without thinking, he threw a punch into the air. The wind exploded, sending a brutal shockwave past him and shattering the ground around them. For a moment, Katsumi couldn't move. Kaido stared at her, his breath ragged, his face still painted with fury. But then, his eyes focused on his hand, the same hand that had almost struck her. Guilt hit him. Shaking, he tried to approach. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." But she had already stepped back. Since that day, nothing was the same between them. The sound of footsteps pulled her out of her thoughts. Katsumi felt a familiar presence. She didn't need to look up. Her heart knew immediately. It was Izuku Yagi. No. Now he was Izuku Otsutsuki. He was there. She smiled bitterly. Do you enjoy watching my life fall apart? Izuku didn't respond immediately. The wind blew, tossing his long white hair. His expression was serene, impenetrable, but in his purple eyes, there was no anger or resentment. He felt nothing for her. At least, that's what he wanted to believe. But deep down, there was still one question. One he had to ask, even though he already knew the answer. Was it worth choosing him over me? It was a simple question. No mockery. No resentment. Katsumi gritted her teeth. Her breath quickened, and before she could stop it, a tear of frustration rolled down her cheek. No. No, it wasn't worth it. Are you happy now? Her voice cracked on the last word, a mix of anger, pain, and regret. Her trembling fist clenched tightly. Izuku watched her without changing his expression. There was no pleasure in his gaze, no satisfaction. Just a cold understanding of reality. No. It doesn't make me happy. Katsumi looked up, surprised by his response. But Izuku continued, his tone firm, without hesitation. Because this was never a game. It wasn't a competition of who was right. It was my life. And you decided it wasn't worth it. Katsumi felt something inside her break even more. Her throat closed up. You don't have to say anything. Izuku slowly turned, as if the conversation no longer mattered. But then, just before taking the last step, he looked at her one more time. I could have given you the world. But you never saw beyond a quirkless boy. His eyes darkened with a hint of melancholy before returning to their usual coldness. And that, Katsumi, will be your greatest regret. A dark portal opened behind him. Katsumi felt her heart race, fear and despair overwhelming her all at once. Wait! She stood up abruptly from the swing, her body reacting before her mind. She wanted to stop him. She wanted to turn everything back. She wanted to do it all differently. But when she took a step toward him, Izuku was already gone. The portal closed with a faint flash. Silence was all that remained. Katsumi stood there for a moment, as if her brain couldn't process what had just happened. But then, her legs gave out, and she fell to her knees, feeling her chest tighten with pain. There was no turning back. There would be no second chances. From the moment she chose Kaido, from the moment she looked at Izuku and decided he wasn't enough, she had lost him forever. A heart-wrenching scream escaped her throat, a raw sound full of despair. Aerk. It was the scream of someone who had had the world in their hands, and let it slip away. Someone who could have had everything, and now had nothing. End of the story. Before finishing the video, remember that videos in English will have this logo in the corner, so you'll know the theory is in English. I have several theories to translate, so support this video to keep translating the rest. On the right side, the last translated theory will be appearing.